Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live. Talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynncullenshow@gmail.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
Hello there, and welcome to you. It is the 26th of October. I'm feeling somewhat subdued today because my sister, Susan, is going through a really rough time. She texted me this morning. She's going to have to put her beloved dog, Ernie, down in just an hour. And she's obviously in great pain. It happened pretty suddenly. He got ill and then diagnosed with a really bad lymphoma. And Susan just texted me that she's sick of burying people she loves, and her husband died of cancer. She nursed him for a long time, and then she's doing the right thing, and a thing that a lot of us dog owners don't do. We wait too long to put them out of their suffering because we can't let go. Because maybe they'll have a good day, because they're still wagging their tail. And I know that from all the animals that I have shared my life with, there are very few that I feel I helped out of this world in a timely manner. I tended to hang on. And Susan's doing, I'm sure, the right thing here by him. It is a loving act, but it's just ripping her heart out right now. So send up a prayer and a hug for her, if you would, because she really is suffering, and that poor animal. Oh, God. It's the hardest thing. I mean, I can't imagine living without animals, but as any animal lover knows, you end up here where she is today all too often. We outlive them. So I just needed to say that because I'm just really wanting to be there with her, and I can't. So that's just by way of explanation. If I don't seem to, I don't know, I hear it in my voice. Whatever. And of course, there's the world knocking at our door. So what I suspected was going to happen with the Republicans in the clown car, they knew it had to stop, that they were really harming their reputation, as if they have one, that is worth holding on to. And so unanimously, all of a sudden, they voted in this guy, we got a Speaker of the House. This Speaker of the House is every bit as conservative as Jim Jordan. He is the most conservative, probably, Speaker of the House ever. He's also one of the least senior, or one would say ready to be third in line to the presidency of the United States. This is a man who literally is against gay rights. He is absolutely opposed to gay marriage. He has a Christian podcast that he does with his wife. And it has the catchy title, Truth Be Told. Well, interesting title, given that when it comes to truth telling, this new Speaker of the House of Representatives of the United States, Mike Johnson, well, I'll give you a quote of his. You know, the allegations about these voting machines, some of them rigged with this software by Dominion, there is a lot of merit to that. And he went on to say that you have to suspect some of this software because it came from Hugo Chavez's Venezuela. Now, these are the same supposed truths that I believe Sidney Powell and Ms. Ellis and Chesborough and the others who have now pled guilty to felonies and misdemeanors for essentially spreading the same lies. And this is the guy who the Republicans have put in a position, literally, a heartbeat away from the Oval Office. Terrifying. He was front and center in his quiet way. Well, I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you haven't already heard, but he worked mightily to undo the election and to provide the insurrectionists all that truth that they needed to storm the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. He, to this day, will not say that Joe Biden is the duly elected president of the United States. And here's, if you think about it, the really grievous danger here. If this guy, Mike Johnson, who tried mightily to undo the election of 2020, is still in this position in a year when the next presidential election occurs with the same two candidates, and we get the same kind of result, he will be in a position of extraordinary power to perhaps undo the results or make another effort. And this time with a little more finesse, perhaps, as well as a great deal more power. He could become a true leader of any Republican efforts to undermine the upcoming election. So already constitutional scholars and sober seers looking ahead are expressing, true concern about what he could potentially do. Here's the head of a nonpartisan advocacy group for fair elections, Genevieve Nadeau, and she says, having somebody who took the steps he took in 2020 in such a position of leadership going into yet another presidential election with the same two people on the ballot is actually very troubling. So he joined in an effort to get the Supreme Court to help in giving Trump a second term. And even that Supreme Court, Trump's Supreme Court, just threw it out. Said you have no standing. And so after it was tossed out, this guy, our new speaker, was asked why he thought that Trump's legal team had failed in almost every, I believe every, legal challenge that they had brought to the supposed rigged election of theirs. And this guy, our new Speaker of the House, stood firm and said, the problem is that Trump didn't have good enough lawyers. No. I don't know. We're in, this, again, I was saying yesterday that the Republican Party is simply a organized group of insurrectionists, and they are an authoritarian party. And they are the least, it's quite clear they do not believe in democracy or the rule of law. So people who know how this kind of stuff works say that if we ended up with, some confusion after the presidential election in 2024, there are, for instance, you could end up, this is getting into Crazyville, and I don't even want maybe to go there. But this is one of the other scholars, a law professor, who said, the Speaker of the House would have significant power to shape the rules if, let's say, neither candidate wins an outright majority of electoral votes. And that could happen if, let's say, a third party candidate manages to win a state. And we end up with a tie in the Electoral College. And what happens then is something called, and I never heard of this, a contingent election. And that would occur in the House of Representatives, where each state and its delegation is given one vote. And he would be in charge. Another law professor at Ohio State says, well, what if the House would, refuse to participate under this speaker? What if they come up with some, they're good at coming up with bogus claims and excuses? What if they disregard their statutory obligations in this case? And what if, let's say, Congress managed to screw things up, and because, like we can see, they certainly can, and failed to finalize the results of this 2024 election before Inauguration Day? This could happen Joe Biden and Kamala Harris would no longer be president and vice president. A constitutional crisis over their succession would ensue. And guess who would say, I'm next in line? Yeah. What's his name? I'll learn it eventually because obviously he's going to be bedeviling us. Mike Johnson. Now, this last scary scenario is, even according to the law professor from Ohio State, he says it's a pretty, out there scenario. But he says, the events of January 6th would have seemed like really far-fetched before they actually, lo and behold, occurred. So things that you think can't possibly happen because it's never happened, just saying. And with this guy who Matt Gaetz loves, he is one of the lunatics. And now in that extraordinary position of power, totally unqualified. It says here he is the most obscure lawmaker to rise to this position. Guess what? Since Dennis Hastert was plucked from the backbenches when the Republicans were in control of the House again and were in a state of, as usual, disarray. Dennis Hastert was the last one. And I'll remind you, he ended up in prison. Something about molesting little boys. Was it on a wrestling team? Funny how things just sort of keep popping back up with this crowd. Wrestling coaches, molestations, lies. So there you have it. We got a speaker. Yay. Yay. Thank you. I will send all of these kind words on to Susan. Yeah. Chuck is saying that his dog is going blind and he's wondering, it's a big adjustment for her, obviously, and for him. And he is hearing that blind dogs adjust well, but he says, I look at her bucket of balls and frisbees and I know that she'll never chase them again. And each day I wonder if I'm holding on too long. Chuck, I would tell you, blindness is not fatal. And I met a blind dog just the other day. I told the story, I think, yesterday. I'd gotten out of its backyard and was roaming around the neighborhood. I didn't realize it was blind. Seemed to be doing pretty damn well. Their sight is their third major sense. Dogs, first of all, are nose. The nose knows. The second thing is hearing. And then third, they bring their vision in. So dogs do very well. I've known a lot of people with blind dogs, blind cats. Yeah, certain things change. But as I said, it is not fatal. It is your dog will be okay. And dogs, unlike us, adjust much more readily. We've all seen three-legged dogs, two-legged dogs, happy as clams, running around, right? So, no, I'm sorry for her loss of sight, but she's still a dog, and dogs are joy. Good news on the labor front. We need good news. United Auto Workers and Ford, one of the three biggies that are being struck, have reached a tentative agreement, which is huge. And I tip my hat to Ford for breaking away and for sitting down and actually negotiating. And they have come up with a 25% wage increase over the life of that contract. That's like one of the most extraordinary. I mean, let me tell you. And my guess is that once that happens and Ford goes back, I don't know that GM and I still call it Chrysler because I can't remember what the hell it is now, might not be far behind. I don't know, but that's just what I'm assuming. And now on to what I can't stand talking about. Because I cannot ignore it any more than you can. It is the big story and will continue to be. And of course, I'm thinking, oh, wait, before I get in there, because I got a letter from Ron. And given that I've just, done this litany of what Republicans are up to, the election denying, and the fact that they have gotten themselves in positions of power in a lot of states as well to screw with results and signing off on electoral college votes. This 2024 election is the most important, without a doubt. I know we say this a lot lately, but unfortunately it's been true every time we say it. This is the most important, consequential election in our lifetime. And Ron brings up a very interesting point in regard to local elections. And he's thinking specifically of a very big election we got going here, which is of the Allegheny County Executive. It's been held for as long as most of us can remember by Rich Fitzgerald, but he has to leave. And so someone else is going to get that job. It will either be a Republican, a guy named Rocky, or it will be a Democrat, a woman, and obviously she will be the first woman to hold this powerful position, Sarah Inamorado. And there's a big push. And I know a lot of Democrats who are thinking they want Rocky because they're scared of the more liberal policies of Sarah Inamorado. You know what? I just have to interrupt here for just 1 second. You know what I can't believe is if you listen to the ads of like Zapala and Rocky, you would think that the place we are teetering here, that, you elect the wrong person and we're done. We're finished. I mean, there's one big group that's behind Rocky that I think is called Save Allegheny County. I mean, like, what? Like, what? Can we get a little less histrionic, do you think? But what I'm thinking is Rocky is part of the good old boys, the establishment, like Zapala, who was a Democrat. But the Democrats said, we're sick and tired of you, buddy. And they threw him out in the primary. And so, no problem. He's now a Republican. Okay. Shows a great deal of a principle there. And I know that when you talk about Allegheny County and Pittsburgh, we talk in such dire terms. They talk in dire terms. It's like hell in a handbasket, right? Crime and this and the economy and homelessness and losing population and blah, blah, blah. Well, what I don't get is, but you guys have been in charge. This is under the good old boys that Pittsburgh continued to lose population. Allegheny County continued to lose population. I mean, all of the troubles we have aren't a result of Sarah Innamorato. She wasn't in power. If we find ourselves in a difficult state, I would think it makes sense to stop voting for the guys who got us here. But Ron brings up a very interesting point. Because I do know a lot of Democrats are voting for Rocky. If Rocky's a Republican. He will have control. And if there's any voting issues, this is the second most populous hunk of votes, biggest hunk of votes in Pennsylvania, a swing state. And Ron is thinking ahead and he's saying, any of these local issues that Sarah and Rocky are debating seem pretty meaningless with the potential end of American democracy on the plate. And he says, I don't care if Rocky goes to church every Sunday. I don't care if he created 100 businesses and worked in a rescue mission feeding thousands of homeless people, none of which I believe he did. I don't know. If he is in charge of our election system from pre-election to certification, which he would be, voter suppression is inevitable. Because that's what Republicans do. He says if Rocky has a spine and decides to be honorable, the Republican cabal will death threat him, his wife, his children. He says, and this isn't even hyperbole. This is now acceptable behavior among these traitors. And look at all that cash appearing in Rocky's campaign. That is no accident. Just throwing that out to you, and I thank Ron for localizing that. Okay, so I was going to head into Israel territory. Here, I was talking to my son about this. I said, okay, imagine, let's just start here. Imagine the horror that the Israelis are still, I'm sure, in shock about the unbelievable barbarity and sadism of the attack that killed so many and took so many into captivity. And anybody immediately understands that a human reaction would be to get the people who did it. I mean, we're looking at another huge mass killing, right? In the U.S. today. A bunch of innocent people were gunned down. In Lewiston, Maine, they were bowling. They were out with friends. And they're dead. And families are grieving. Communities are traumatized. And do you think anyone doesn't want to see the perpetrator grabbed, gotten, brought to justice? It's human nature. It only makes sense, of course. All right, so here's the problem here. The people who did this went back to their warrens in Gaza with their hostages, with their captors. Somebody, there's a 6-month-old hostage. They went back to their homes. And you know where they live? They live like everybody in Gaza, cheek to jowl. It is a whole bunch of people packed into a very little piece of land. So, that is how they defend themselves. They hide amongst the people. They don't wear military uniforms. You can't tell a Hamas guy from the grocer. They live among them, under them, over them. And so for Israel, this truly aggrieved nation at this point, needing to go and get the people who did this to their people, again, perfectly understandable human response. How do they do that? How do they do that and answer what Joe Biden and everybody else is saying to them? We understand you having to go after Hamas, but please don't hurt the innocent people of Gaza. How is it possible? How is it possible? When you have the sons of bitches who did what they did to those families and people at the music festival, those kids, and to those families, to children, to old people. And then they go hide among their own children and old people. These are not honorable fighters. And I keep hearing that Israel's supposed to play by the rules of war. There's rules now? How's Hamas doing with those rules? So Israel's supposed to get hit like this in their guts, in their hearts, and they're supposed to fight by the rules while they're fighting these despicable people who use their own for shields. I also want to say this. I'm getting really sick of seeing the New York Times, Washington Post, television news, all saying, and the Gaza Health Ministry says blankety blank, 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 as if it's a reputable source. The Gaza Health Ministry is a son of a bitch terrorist who's been put in a position of being the Gaza Health Ministry. Like they give a shit about the health of the Gazans. Their numbers are inflated. They've always been inflated. They do not count. They count their terrorists among their civilian dead. Israel says this many of our soldiers, this many of our civilians. The Gaza Health Ministry says this many Gazans. Never says this many of our soldiers, because they don't have soldiers. They have bloodthirsty terrorists. The news is so filled with crap. How many people think that a hospital in Gaza was bombed? Huh? How many? I'd say 99% of the world. Do you know that hospital was not hit? That hospital stands. Nobody inside that Gaza hospital was killed. And in all likelihood, Israel didn't send the rocket that did hit the parking lot next to the hospital, which the Gazan Ministry of Health or whatever said killed 500 people. No, it didn't. Whoever bombed that parking lot at most killed plenty of people, but not even half the number. By all accounts, they offer no corroborating evidence of any of it. It is just intended to inflame their base. Inflaming bases, something Republicans are good at, keeps them in power. Inflaming bases, it's what the pro-Palestinian crowd does when most of them know not one whit of the history. They decry what they call the genocide going on. Wonder how many of them sent charitable dollars in the last, 10, 20 years to Gazan charities to help the people in real ways, other than just getting up on their hind legs and screaming about Jews. And now I want to address that. I was thinking the other day, and by the way, tomorrow is the anniversary, the 5th anniversary of the Jew killing massacre around the corner from me, Tree of Life. The biggest Jew massacre in the history of the United States. That will be commemorated tomorrow. It's all a bit much. But I was thinking about the phrase, the word anti-Semitism. And I don't get it. And I'm going to stop using it because it's wrong. It's not a word that means what it says it is. What is a Semite? Anti-Semitism is against Semites. You know, most of the Semites, the vast majority of Semites in this world are Muslims. When people say anti-Semite, they're not talking about Islamophobia. How did Jews don't even get, we don't even get a word that truly describes Jew hate. I looked up Semite. It's it says all Semites descended from the patriarch Abraham. Now, he was a Jew. But he's also a patriarch of the Muslims. And it must really piss them off, huh? Abraham, he's the patriarch of the Christians. Like the progenitor. But before him was a guy called Noah. Remember him? And I've also seen that Semite comes from the descendants of Noah's son, Shem. Okay? I looked this up yesterday. Shem. So a Shemite. And so that includes this huge hunk of the Middle East and the Arab world. But that's not what the word anti-Semite means. We know it's supposed to mean anti-Jew. And yet, I'm done using it. It's bullshit. I want my own word. We Jews deserve our own hate word since we've been hated since day one. We want our own Jew hate word. I've never, when I was a kid, I was called a dirty Jew once. I don't think anyone's ever, has any Jew been ever called a dirty Semite? No. It's Jew, which we've been talking about somewhat. So I'm done with anti-Semitism. Done with it. I'm calling it what it is. Jew haters. Okay? That's it. Jew haters. And now I want to give voice to some amazing Jews who have been grievously hurt by what Hamas did. They've lost loved ones. And yet they don't want war. These Jews are, to me, more highly evolved than most of us. I'm always blown away by people who have been grievously, brutally harmed. And then, as the Jew Jesus would have said, turn the other cheek. It's a rare, rare thing. But I want to read what some of them say. It's in a column by Nicholas Kristof, who is beside himself with grief. He says, I've been following the Middle East conflict for most of my life, and I cannot remember a time of such despair, trauma, and mutual mistrust. It is heartbreaking to see the collapse of all hope. Worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust and a devastating air assault, siege of Gaza. And then he talks to a guy, Maoz Inan. He happens to run a hospital in Tel Aviv. But his 78-year-old father and his 75-year-old mother were among those who were so brutally terrorized and killed by Hamas. So he's orphaned. And this guy, Maoz Inan, says, I don't stop crying. I'm crying for my parents. I'm crying for my friends. I'm crying for those who are kidnapped. I'm crying for the victims on the Palestinian side. And I'm crying for all the victims that are going to suffer. We are just broken. But from these traumatized days, we must learn the lessons of history. And that is that we need to break the pattern of escalating violence that only feeds more hatred, creates more orphans, and self-replicates indefinitely. He's right. That's what needs to be done. Benjamin Netanyahu is not the man who's going to do that. Nor, I think, would there be many people capable. But of course, he's right. And Christoph talked to another Israeli, Yonatan Zeigan, whose mother is one of the hostages. She was taken hostage. Her name is Vivian Silver. She's 74 years old. She was a peace activist. She spent decades of her life volunteering to help people in Gaza. And Yonatan Zeigan said of his mom, Mom always said we have to shift the paradigm. There isn't safety in a state of war. It can't be done. And he and his brother are now suffering so and wondering where their mother is, how their mother is, what she is thinking. And they think she would be appalled by the bombing and by an invasion. She would have been, one of them says, mortified by the destruction and vengeance. Yonatan's brother says that he's so shaken by the savagery of the Hamas attacks and understands why so many are determined to extract the same kind of payment on the Gazans. But he goes on to say, I just don't think it will bring us any closer to a better position. Vengeance isn't something to build foundations on. It's not a strategy. How many dead Palestinians will be enough for us to feel safe? I don't think there's any number. Christoph ends his piece by saying, may we learn from their wisdom and humanity. We won't. most of us are just so incapable of it. Somebody pointed out on Twitter that if Hamas really cared about its population, they have bomb shelters all over Gaza, the tunnels. Why not? As a matter of fact, it's believed that the hostages are being safeguarded in the tunnels. Well, I haven't heard of any just Gazan civilians, women, children, being told, get into the tunnels. We'll stay up here and protect you. Get into the tunnels. You don't see that, do you? Because, well, that's not what the people of Gaza are for. Just say it. Okay, I'm going to end this on an obit that's like nothing terribly out of it. Just shows how lives, some people really grab on and live a full life. I mean, and many of them. This guy even says he was privileged from day one. I mean, some people are given a lot. And it's amazing how many people are given a lot and then still don't live a life that is maybe even much worth living, right? That don't savor their lives and try things. Well, this guy did. I never heard of him before, but I want to bring a little bit of just the life he chose to live, because it's interesting. He was born to a famous man. Well, actually, I think he was born before his father was famous. Hang on, I'm taking a swig of something. Thank you. But soon after he was born, his father became famous. His father was an actor, a star. His father was a guy I always had the hots for. Ideas like masculine. His father was Yul Brynner, famous for The King and I, famous for playing Pharaoh, right? He played Pharaoh in which movie? Can't remember. Anyway, I don't know how great an actor he was, but he was just like friggin', I thought, gorgeous. Oh, he was in the Ten Commandments. Yeah. So, he had one son. And that son was also named Yule, but he was never called that. He was called Rock. Because his father wanted him to be as tough as Rocky Graziano. Ask me why. But so Rock Brynner is now dead. He was 76 years old. And it says here that from, day one, he was just among the most glamorous. I mean, people who, we would swoon at just brushing elbows with, were just, regular folks. Elizabeth Taylor came to all his birthday parties. Liza Minnelli was a lifelong friend from childhood. The French poet and playwright Jean Cocteau was his godfather. And so this is the kid who's born with the proverbial silver spoon in his mouth. But he lived his own wondrous life. Now, obviously, having those kinds of friends opens up things to you. But it seems to me, as I read his obit, that he didn't use them like a lot of other sons of famous people would. Not in particularly a nepotistic way. It's just that it provided him access in some ways. In some ways, he turned his back on it. He was a very gifted student. He was a serious academic. He went to Yale, then he went to Trinity College in Dublin, then he came back to Columbia. He ends up getting a doctorate in American history. He was a college professor for many years. But he was a playwright. He was a novelist. He was one of these people who just lived this life of, okay, well, now what do I do? He wandered off to Europe and found himself, and I suppose, again, this is by virtue of who his father was, he joined the entourage of Muhammad Ali, who at the time was on sort of a world tour after he had lost the heavyweight championship title because of his activist anti-Vietnam War stance. Remember when he was stripped of his title? And this guy befriends him. And Ali said to anybody who asked, "This is my bodyguard." And the funny thing is Rock Brenner was this skinny, just looked like, it didn't look like his father at all. Didn't inherit his good looks or anything. He just looked like, you could, like a gust of wind could knock him over. But Ali, with his wonderful sense of humor, would say, "Man, who'd have thunk the son of the Pharaoh of Egypt would be protecting a little black boy from Louisville?" But Rock Brenner didn't just, hang on, it says here. He worked actually as Ali's press liaison, and he worked it well. Then he ended up back in the U.S., and he befriended a guy named Robbie Robertson, who was the chief songwriter for the band, and started driving the band's tour bus. And when Robbie Robertson said to Rock Brenner, I think somebody should make a documentary about us, on the road and just the whole thing. I think it would make a great documentary. And Rock Brenner, says, "Oh, I think you're right. I think I know exactly who you need to talk to." And so who does he get in touch with? Another friend, a guy named Martin Scorsese. He's driving a tour bus, but he calls up Martin Scorsese. And what resulted was one of the best concert documentaries ever made by most critical thought, I believe, called The Last Waltz. And then he finds himself at a London hotel hanging out. He meets another guy who's an entrepreneur who's got an idea he's telling him about a rock and roll themed restaurant. They become close friends, and damn if he's not in on the ground floor with the Hard Rock Cafe, founded by this guy. And Rock goes to New York to manage the New York Hard Rock Cafe, which became like the place for the high and mighty to be seen in '84. And then he stayed there for about a year. And then he decided he wanted to learn how to fly. He buys a plane. He starts a small charter air service. He's living in a guest house somewhere in exchange for working a small field of vegetables for the owners. Then he writes a biography of his father. Then he goes back to Columbia, gets his doctorate. Then he ends up becoming a professor. Then he writes the Doomsday Report, which was a prophetic satire about climate change. He wrote about thalidomide. The State Department used him a few times on missions to Russia, since that is where his father was from. This is a guy, so he's my age, and he didn't lead the usual life of a celebrity's kid. He made use of the ties, but totally did his own thing. Sounds like a really nice guy. And he says, it is difficult for the children of iconic figures to establish independent identities, but with all the suffering in this world, I wouldn't shed too many tears for those who have had privileged youth. Good guy. Rock. Ewell. Brenner. Thank you all for being with me, and I'll see you Monday.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.